Welcome, friends, back to Notes to My Nervous System, a podcast about understanding your nervous system so that you can move through hard moments with a little more calm and a lot less self blame. I'm Erin, a mom, a therapist, and creator of the Mind Circuit app. It's called Ease. It's a simple nervous system reset tool for moments when your body needs support before your brain can catch up. Today, I'm super excited. We are joined by Dr. Janyne McConaughey. Woohoo! I think I said it right. Anybody who listens knows I'm dyslexic. I have speech impediment and ADHD, so they know me and words don't always get along. She is a trauma educator and author whose work centers around helping survivors reclaim agency after trauma. She actually has, is it a new edition coming out or updated edition?
I have a follow-up book to Trauma in the Pew.
I'm excited. So she has a new book coming out. We're super excited about that, and we're going to talk about that. You focus and you have taught a lot about self-regulation, finding the pause, rebuilding a sense of choice in the body. And so that's where I'd like to start first is so many trauma survivors describe feeling like their body, their nervous system is always on or just completely shut down, like there's no middle ground. So I'd like to start there, better understanding what is going on in those moments so that somebody in that situation or somebody trying to help a friend or family member who's going through something like that and they're being triggered, what they can do. Because anybody listening, please don't say just be calm.
No, not effective.
No, it doesn't work.
In fact,
No.
it becomes its own trigger. And then you not only have the original trigger that you were dealing with, but now you have the trigger of being told. So I for those who are listening by audio, you won't see my hand motions in this, but the calm down where they lower their hands in front of them, and the calm down motion with their hands is just the hugest trigger for me. And my husband knows, oh no, I must never do that. So yeah, we can't calm down just by being told to calm down, but there are ways that we can.
So, what would you tell someone who doesn't have a lot of experience with trauma and they have a loved one who's going through it so that they better understand what's going on within the body and how to be supportive in those moments?
I think that the concept that I love the most in this discussion is the idea of co-regulation. And so to understand co-regulation, you have to go back into the um, infant experience of nurturing and attachment. A lot of times when attachment is talked about, it's talked about from an adult perspective, what attachment style, but that is not that's an outgrowth of those early attachment relationships, but that isn't the part you should talk about. You should talk about what happened when you were very, very young. And I grew up in the generation, I'll give my age away here. I grew up in the generation where they whisked the baby away. The mother was put under. There was no initial attachment experience. And I stayed in the nursery for 5 days, and my mother said this was her chance to rest, and she never even had me brought to the broom. And so that if you understand anything about attachment, everything that needs to take place during that initial period was absent for me, except with the nurses. And so part of that process in those early days is the co-regulation, where the mothers, and all the old wives' tales would say, if you keep calm, your baby will be calmer. And that, in a sense, is really true because that is co-regulation. So you actually share your calm with the infant, and the infant is able to learn how to self-regulate themselves, which takes years because they have newly formed little nervous systems. But in that process, you eventually come to the place where you've had the regulation modeled by a caring adult enough that you are able to do that for yourself, self-regulate. So I say all that when you're working with someone, which I have a great story. I'm a storyteller, so I'll probably tell
Please.
stories today. But when you say, well, how can I help? How can I help a friend who's going through? And And healing from trauma is so messy. My goodness, it is. You're just as messy can be as you heal and work through. If you're in therapy, or even if you're not in therapy, healing is just messy. So I have a very close friend, and we both have trauma backgrounds, and we were going into a situation together that we knew that we both could be triggered by. And when I say triggered, what I'm saying is that our nervous systems could be dysregulated by. And so we went in and we were sitting next to each other, and I could feel it in her body. I mean, I could feel her tensing up next to me. I could feel her starting to get, fidgety. I could feel it. And so I knew that I was remaining calm in that moment. Sometimes it's the opposite. But in that moment, I was the one who was the calm. And so I just leaned in a little closer to her, just so our shoulders were touching a little bit. And then I started breathing deeply. I took a deep
Mhm.
breath. I did a slow exhale, which is how you reset your nervous system. And then I would take another one, and pretty soon she was doing it with me. And we were both sitting there and doing it. And then I stopped the breathing like that, but she continued. And
Oh,
so I have that example in my next book as to how we co-regulate, how we can co-regulate with each other. I didn't tell her to calm down, I didn't tell her, "Hey, I think you're tensing up. I think you should stop. You need to," right? I didn't do any of that. I just leaned in and shared my calm with her. And that is the very best thing that we can do, whether it involves touch, whether it involves just sitting across from them, breathing, depends on the situation and the relationship. And so that would be my biggest suggestion, and the one I put in this next book.
I think that's lovely, and it so easily points out how to do it and what to expect and how you don't need the words, right? And so many times, we as humans, we just want to talk about it all. And I'm
Right.
guilty of this, but that's not gonna help regulation.
I have lots of words. I've had lots of words since I was a little girl. I say that the train with words pulled up in front, and it wrecked in front of me, and they all dumped out on me because I have more words than any human should possibly have, and I have since I was little. And so I had the hardest thing for me to do is to not talk. So I'm really proud of that example because I thought, "Oh, there's such growth in what I did that day." That I didn't feel like I needed to lean over and talk to her, which then it would have made it everyone around us would have seen what was going on. And so pointed it out that she was struggling even more. And
Mm,
so I think that, yeah, that we just don't need, we can be with one another and support one another without words. I think my therapist, and so my first book, Brave, so I've written 4 books, and the first 3 are memoirs. In my first book, Brave, I tell the story with my therapist about beginning therapy and discovering that I had totally repressed most of my story in order to
yeah,
live the life that I needed to live, specifically in the church. And so, but she basically demonstrated and shared her calm with me and helped me learn how to regulate myself. And and so there were copious amounts of our therapy time where no one was saying anything, which was, unusual for me, but where she was just sharing her calm with me. And so I attribute my understanding of how important that is to that relationship, that therapeutic relationship that we had.
that's beautiful and also very brave of your therapist. A lot of therapists, especially newbies, feel the pressure to constantly be talking, and the best moments come in silence.
Right. One day, so I did not know I was dissociating during therapy, and I didn't even know what dissociation was. I knew nothing about trauma when I walked in the door. And this is
What
all, it
led you to walk into the door?
was a God prompt, and that's all I can say. I was like, "I'm not okay," and God's, basically, "No, you're really not." And I was given the name of this therapist by someone I was mentoring, and I felt I'm supposed to go see her, and that's how I ended out walking into therapy. I was absolutely terrified. One day, I contacted her after the session. I said, "Did I dissociate?" And she said, "Well, yes, you did." And I said, "Well, why didn't you like say something or get me out of it?" She said, "Oh no, oh, you were doing a lot of work inside of yourself while you were there. And I knew that if I just allowed you to come back to yourself on your own, that you would have made progress while you were there. So I just sat with you." And so I think when you're watching someone who dissociates and that they've left the planet, they aren't even there. Your tendency once again is to say, "Hey, come back. I need you here." Instead of just sitting,
Mhm.
keeping them safe, being that calm with them and allowing them to process through what they need to, because they're even though they're not talking to you, it doesn't mean that nothing's going on inside of them. And
Exactly.
it's protective.
It's very protect a lot of people don't recognize or understand how common actually it is to dissociate, and that's just a protection that our body does, our brain does for us.
It's interesting because my daughter, who's very empathic, extremely empathic, and we were sitting watching a TV program, and something in the show caused me to just dissociate. And after a little bit, she said, "Mom, are you okay? The air around you changed." And she said, I could feel the difference in you. There's something different." And I was like, she's recognizing when I'm dissociated, which I thought was really amazing that she could do that. And so it is and I'm very, very calm in that. Like when you say you need to calm down, well, my body's like, how do I dissociate? Where can I go and just dissociate from this? And my husband has a very, very, very horrific trauma background too. And he gives me permission to say that. And we call his dissociation that he went out, and when he was a kid, he'd go lay in the cabbage field. And
Mhm.
and so that and so I'm like, I think you were in the cabbage field today." "Yeah, I would think I was." And the thing is you can start to recognize it,
Yeah,
right? Right? And the key is not to shame yourself.
but we do that so often. It's again, we're not recognizing that it's trying to protect us, and it's nothing to be shamed of nor scared of, and we need to talk about it more.
Right. I had to realize that I right after I began therapy, I dissociated while going down a set of stairs and fell like four steps and landed on a concrete floor.
My gosh.
So, but I was fine. And I think because I was so relaxed, I just felt like I floated off the stair and landed on the floor, and I never tightened up my muscles. And so that was a clue to me that whatever this was that I did, it could be
It could be
dangerous.
dangerous.
Yeah. And so I'm getting an
I'm getting
echo.
it.
Is it important? So
Parts. All the above.
it's been 11 years since I began therapy, and I published my first book 3 years out. And then Trauma in the Pews, which was my fourth book, was like, I don't know what it would be, 8 years out. And in that book, I originally was writing to survivors who felt like they had failed spiritually. And so I'd written a book specifically to survivors because one of my readers of my third book, which was my kind of my faith journey in South Africa, wrote to me and said, "No one ever told me it wasn't a spiritual problem." Also had significant trauma in their background. And so
Mhm.
I thought, well, maybe it's the trauma that caused my struggles with doing spiritual practices or all of the things that I did. I mean, I was a Bible college professor for 33 years. I mean, nobody tried any harder than I did, right? And
Yeah.
I was an educator. I was a teacher educator, but within the context of ministry preparation colleges. And so I began to connect those dots, and I went to my publisher and I said, "I want to write a book to survivors that talks about their faith." And then in excuse me, and in discussions, we realized that I could continue to help survivors for the rest of my life, but if they kept going back into church situations where the ministry leaders did not understand trauma, that they were only going to be re-traumatized. And so I realized that I needed to talk to ministry leaders. So that's where trauma in the pews came from. And so it is written to ministry leaders, but I was really kind of upset. I go, I don't want to write to ministry leaders. I want to write to survivors. And then the one mentor that I had said that the survivors will be reading over their shoulders. And so as I wrote the book, you can kind of tell that I'm also talking to the survivors kind of in code all throughout the book. And so who was it that latched onto the book and, made it become popular and got it well known? And it was all the survivors, which I figured it would be. And there were some amazing ministry leaders who wanted to work on their churches becoming more trauma informed. And they have supported me and encouraged me and invited me on podcasts and so forth. So I'm in no my son and my daughter-in-law are both ordained. And so my dad was a pastor. So I have no ill will toward the church. I just want him to do it better. Just do better. And so anyway, when that book got done, then the survivors all said, this was a fantastic book and it helped us to understand so much better. But what do we do now? Now that we understand why we are struggling with these specific spiritual practices, what can we do instead? And that's where this next book came from. And I realized, that in large part, was a lack of understanding of my healing journey being a spiritual practice. So there, you can look at a list like prayer and meditation and Christian meditation. I want to clarify there. If you look in the books on spiritual practices, study. These are the ones I use in Trauma in the Pews. Service, all of this. When you look at all of those, there were specific ways that I, as a trauma survivor, struggled with each of them. Some of them made me a really wonderful church member, like my need for validation, my need to stay busy, my need to, like, all of my ways I was avoiding my trauma. Those were wonderful church attributes. I was just the busy bee, involved in everything, doing everything. So anyway, so it kind of works in both directions. And I say in the book for ministry leaders to not take advantage of those who have experienced trauma, because they need to heal. They need to be healing and not just being busy about the business all of the time. And like, I was in a church. Sorry, I interrupted you. I get excited about. Oh yes, let me say that. I was in a church service once with someone who was doing his best to become trauma informed, and he said, "We need volunteers in the children's ministry." But I want to say, if you're on a journey of healing and you're working hard to heal right now, I don't want you to feel like you need to volunteer for this, because you need to devote your time to what you're doing to heal. I cry. It's the first time I'd ever heard a ministry leader give me permission not to feel guilty about doing something. So, yeah, I think that there's so many ways that people, trauma survivors, are unintentionally harmed. It's not all intentional, but once you have the opportunity to learn how to become trauma informed and you decide not to follow that wisdom, then it becomes intentional at that point. And so I put the book out there, and a lot of ministry leaders wouldn't read it. I was at a conference. I was at a conference and the guy came up. We had a booth and Scott was sitting at the booth, and the guy came up and said, "Oh, so you wrote this book?" And my husband said, "No, my wife did." And he set the book down and walked away. My husband was so mad. And so anyway, so there's that. There's all sorts of, but it's not all of them, and there's many of them that are trying very hard. One church in Arizona did an entire series of sermons and used the book as reading material for the parishioners. And so I'm very grateful for those, because I'm grateful because it helps the survivors. It helps It helps them to be less triggered, more cared for, better understood because what they have, the wisdom that they have, post-traumatic wisdom that they bring is so important, and it's being left out because they feel like they have to leave their stories in the car in order to come into church. And so I say all this in that book. So I come to the next book and I'm like, well, I don't want to just repeat the other book because I didn't answer the what do we do now? And I thought, well, one thing is that we need to understand that a spiritual practice, the purpose of a spiritual practice is to draw closer to God. And everyone has a choice whether they believe in God. What I say doesn't have to be spiritual. Healing trauma is not spiritual in essence in itself, though some would say that that's true. We have to understand that the work invested in healing accomplishes the same goal that every other spiritual practice does. And it does because I feel closer to God now than I did before this all started. Healing was the spiritual practice that enabled me to draw closer to God. So that's my premise for this book. And I talk about how you can, as a survivor, understand your nervous system, understand religious trauma if you've experienced that. There's a big emphasis on understanding and helping to heal religious trauma, and how to regulate your nervous system, find the pause so that you can reflect on what is occurring and what is causing you to become dysregulated, and then use agency to develop your own plan for spiritual practices based on who you are, not on what someone else tells you to do, but based on who you are. And so, and I use, because I'm an educator, I use Gardner's, there's 9 multiple intelligences. And they talk about being nature or music or, what are your interests? And I find that we don't do that nearly enough. We talk about personality. What is your personality? But that doesn't even encompass anything deep into who you are. And trauma prevents you from developing a sense of self. So my book is to help people to develop a sense of self and then develop a spiritual practice that matches who they are, who they were created to be.
Oh, that's beautiful. Do you still find pushback about talking about religious trauma?
Oh, yes. I say this, it's really interesting because
Anyway,
when I published Trauma in the Pews, the whole religious trauma community was like, "Oh, she's written a book about religious trauma." Right? Well, I didn't really. It was about people in the pews who've experienced trauma, but they took it to mean that I was writing about religious. And right before it published, I went running to my publisher and said, wait, we have to include something about religious trauma in here because I didn't really address that. So I added something in. So I'm also making up for the fact that I didn't really address. But because the religious trauma community grabbed a hold of the book and they loved the book, they felt it was a really important book, but wished I had addressed religious trauma better. Then all of a sudden I was drawn into the community of religious trauma, people working with religious trauma. And when that happened, all of a sudden I realized I'm not even calling what happened to me religious trauma.
oh, you weren't?
And it's so, I've had so much religious trauma, it just seeps out of my pores. And yet I was still doing that protective thing around me, right? That I just couldn't accept that this was religious trauma. And now I look at it and go, "Oh my gosh, how could I not realize that?" So then I began to unpack my religious trauma, and I've done a lot of that on my Substack. And then I got involved. Right now there's 4 of us, the founder and then 3 of us who are co-founders for the Religious Trauma Network. And we we started a year ago. Like, if we don't start this, we'll never start this. We're all very busy people, but we're trying to provide a safe space and resources. And we've started like a once a month chat where people can show up and talk, tell their stories if they need to, and where we can support them. And so that I'm deep into that world now. And
that wasn't your intention with the first book.
no, it wasn't. It wasn't my intention. I was protecting my abusers just like I had been trained to protect, I just look at it and here's the thing is that our stories and our healing unfolds as it needs to unfold.
Very true, very wise.
And we can't, and that's another thing about talking is it become like I had friends that were like, "You've had so much religious trauma," but they didn't actually ever say that to me. But when I came out, I said, "This is religious trauma," and they were like, "Well, duh." Really? But I'm glad that they didn't push at it. My therapist didn't push at it because you need a little push once in a while. You need some guidance. You're a therapist, you know that. But there's a point where you can open it up too soon. And I wasn't ready. And
Absolutely. It has to be the person's choice
yes.
because choice has been taken away from you enough.
Yes. And I did not I wrote a piece about choice, and it's about how choice had been taken away from me and how a lot of healing was to rediscover agency and that I could make my therapist said, "But you've made really good decisions in your life." I said, "Yeah, but I don't believe I have. I don't." And so it's so complicated. And I'm really honest in my books. Like my first book, it's real messy, and I wouldn't change a word in it because so many people have said, "Thank you for normalizing how messy I am."
What gave you the courage to be so messy? Because,
Um,
I mean, nowadays with social media and everything being put out there, it's so hard to be messy and authentic.
and I think my first book is such a beautiful book to read. And the therapeutic relationship, I think that I finally felt seen and I understood that this what I was dealing with, my messiness that I was dealing with was not because there was something inherently wrong with me, but because of what had happened to me and the damage that it had done to my nervous system, my internal frame of reference, my narratives I told about the world, that the choices that I made because my abuse started at the age of 3. And so it was a church member in a home daycare, and so I when they talk about recovery, I had nothing to recover, I mean, you had to go way back into infancy when my mother didn't even acknowledge me for 5 days, right? There was this wasteland of emotional needs that were never met and were harmed, and so, I think that having and I say this as a tribute to your field, having a therapist who unconditionally accepted my messy helped me helped me to, um, help me to be brave and to 'cause I said one day, I said it was a horrible I had a I rated therapy sessions by how high my pile of Kleenex were at the end of the session.
I have clients who will do that. They'll walk out and they'll go, I only cried this much. And I'm like, who's keeping track?
I was. And I mean, it was a particularly high pile of Kleenex that day. And I said, if I can help one person, because it felt so lonely. I mean, the whole first year of therapy, no one knew I was in therapy except for my select family members and very select friends, and no one at work. And I said, if I can help one person not be as lonely in this process of healing, and the only way I knew to do that was to just tell them what it was like for me. And so it was my gift to other people that helped me to be brave, that I could get, they say in public speaking, if you can stop thinking about yourself and think about your audience, think about, and I trained teachers and I said, if you think about yourself too much, you're going to feel awkward and you're going to wonder if you're doing it right and you're going to do all of this stuff. But if you just keep your focus on your students, then you can overcome any little foibles that you have, and, so I think that that's what helped me to be brave was that I kept my focus on who I hope to heal.
Mhm.
Not heal, not that I'm gonna heal them, but who I hoped would heal. I said that wrong.
Right.
Um,
Feel seen and heard in a
right.
way that you haven't.
Yes, because there was no, and I included because I have been so completely lacking in understanding of anything about trauma. I call my book psychoeducational because in the midst of telling my story, I tell, like in the next book, in fact, I we were gonna one of the questions was about the pause, and so as part of my book, I talk about, Dr. Jonathan Balin and, the challenge of getting past or getting above our quick reaction, which is finding the pause, hey? And so I say, the good news is there's a part of your brain that can act as a pause button without going deeply into neuroscience. This part of the brain, called the cingulate, acts as a link between our thinking brain and the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, which is part of
Uh-huh.
the brain. So it mixed in with my storytelling. I have these nuggets of information to help people to understand when you're looking for the pause, something is happening inside your brain, and you can begin to recognize when that happens. And so it's a main focus in my writing, not that I only pull my story off the shelf when it serves a purpose to help someone to understand better what happened and what they're dealing with.
I love that. It's like a manual for understanding your body better if you've been through trauma.
Right. And I have a PhD, so I started listening to all the professional development things for therapists and for,
Uh-huh.
and I was like, people can't access this. This is really great
No,
information.
no.
But even the body keeps the score is a deep dive, let alone polyvagal theory by Stephen Ford. I mean, it's way out there, right? And
It
so
is. And I love it. And I want to talk about it more, but it's hard to make it accessible.
And so what I did was I set down my PhD writing skills and I wrote for my readers. And
Mhm.
especially in trauma and abuse, I had I had two publishers and both of them were amazing. And I got 4 books out in 5 years, which is just unheard of.
That's incredible.
And so I know. And then I got
Is that
paused.
that overdoing thing?
And that's that overdoing things, you think? Yeah, yeah. But I had so much understanding in my head from my journey that I just needed to get it out there. And I'm a writer. Like some people write books because they want to get the information out there. But they'll tell you I don't really enjoy writing that much, right? I need my
Mhm.
editors, I need my publisher because I have the information, but I don't really enjoy writing. Well, I, on the other hand, was born to be a writer. When I figured out who I was, it's pretty easy for me to talk clearly, but it's even easier for me to write. So once I was freed from the hold that trauma had on me, I just took off. I wrote to process. I wrote to I created a blog. It just started flowing out of me. And that's because of healing.
What would you say to someone who might be on the fence to seek out support, especially if we're talking about religious trauma, because it was an authority figure?
Mhm.
And now you're asking them to be alone with another individual in that role of like, not an expert, but removed from you.
Right. So I write that I have several. In fact, I did a Substack recently on helping people to consider when they want to write and tell their story, whether it's just trauma or whether it's religious trauma. And because there has to be some boundaries, there has to be some guidelines, there has to be some time where you reflect on what you're going to share and what you're not going to share, what you might share in the future, but you're not sharing now. Why are you sharing it? Why and I don't ever name anyone, but I would never condemn anyone for naming. It's not my story. It's just in my story, it didn't make sense to name anyone. It would have detracted from what my purpose was. But for some people, naming is part of the purpose because those people are still harming people and it's important to call them out. But you get caught in legal ramifications and so forth, and you have to say, is this important enough for me to name and face the consequences of what will come? Sometimes there needs to be more healing. I was working on a different book, which has still not been published. And my publisher, we'd known each other, my second publisher, since we were in high school, and we were working together on that book. And she said, Janyne, I can't publish this for you right now. You're not ready. You're protecting your abuser. Most important thing anyone ever said to me, because I went, oh my gosh, you're right. I need to go work on this some more. And I went back to therapy and I could do that book now. It's probably in the line, but I wasn't ready then. So I think when, and especially with religious trauma, loss of community, religious trauma is so much about loss of community and loss of, you don't have a sense of self. So when you step out of that community that's telling you who to be, you don't know who you are. And I had a friend, his mother, she was on her deathbed, like in her 80s. And she looked at her son and she said, I've been serving in the church my whole life and I don't know who I am. I don't know who's going to go see Jesus. I have no idea who I am. I've just become what the church needed me to be. And so, and that is true. I'm always like, if you're going to talk about your kids, talk about who they are, not how much they love God. Let's talk about, do they like horses? Do they like to be outdoors? Do they love sports? I want to hear about them. I want to hear who they were created to be. Anyway, I think that, and trauma is trauma. It doesn't matter. It has the same effect on the body, whether it takes place in church or outside or in the world or in family. The trauma, what takes place in the body as a result of trauma is the same. The problem with trauma that takes place in church settings is it gets this added layer of filtering God through it. I mean, you would anyway, no matter where you were, but it's that it gets spiritualized and it's just so damaging. In my next book, I talk about that a lot. How did this religious trauma, how did it change your view? And so many were harmed by teachings as young children. And a lot of us, I talk with a lot of moms that are my age, and they're like, I wish I had understood this. I taught some of this stuff to my children when they were young. And I said, we couldn't know what we couldn't know. But they're adults now, and we can have hard conversations with them, which I've had many with my own children. And I'm just so proud of the human beings they become, and that we are able to have those conversations. And I have to own it. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I never really believed in spanking, but the church told me to spank, and I did. I thought that was the godly thing to do, and I realized I was harming your nervous systems. One, it affected very greatly, and one, I don't know what could affect that one. Anyway, so it depends on the child, right? And yeah, religious trauma is its whole, and there aren't enough resources out there to.
There aren't. There really isn't.
Yeah, and
It's like still somewhat taboo, and I don't understand why.
right, because the church is a system that protects itself, and they're gatekeepers. And so any doubting, any questioning, any voicing of a different opinion, it isn't that you, like, I had someone who's known me for 50 years recently say to me, "Do you even believe in truth anymore?" And it's like, "Oh my goodness." So it's
Why would you ask that?
why would you ask that? What happens is that this isn't just a personal attack, it's a personal spiritual attack. So it
Instead of recognizing it's the human who's doing it to the other human, we're still viewing it as you're attacking the church.
right. And there's really, I mean, anyone who reads my book, I mean, they always come back and say, "You were really kind. You did not bash the church." And I'm like, "No, no, no. If I just want us to do better. And why would I bash something? It would be like bashing my own father, who was an amazing human being, or bashing my son or my daughter-in-law. Why would I do that? It's the system. It isn't the people. It's the
Right.
system that protects, for the sake of the church, it protects abusers and abuse of all kinds. And that is what we're calling out. But sometimes some promote themselves so much as a protector of the church that they get it. I just want to talk about the system. Oh no, I'm the head of the system. Okay, then I have to talk about you. So, anyway, it's hard. It's hard for people. It's interesting, I had a
Mm.
friend and I gave her a preview copy of my book, and she's been reading it, and she went to a setting, a Bible group, and she shared some, and people just started telling their stories. And that's what happens whenever you give people permission to talk about the harm that's been caused, then it just starts pouring out of people because they finally found a little space where they could be safe and say how much they hurt, how painful it was.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Is
So,
that kind of like why you started that monthly group?
yeah, just to give people a safe space to, um
And what is it called again?
Religious Trauma Network. And so that the website is just religiostraumanetwork.com. And in our blog are the announcements. I think the next one will be at the end of February. But they're like we're trying to do them the last Monday of every month. And so that kind of give you a handle on that. But I've done groups. I haven't done recently because of my husband's illness, but which he's doing so well now. But I was doing groups with Trauma in the Pews, and people would come with their stories, and they're painful. They're painful stories. You know that. So,
We're about to run out of time and I want to be respectful.
you're fine. We lost some time in there, so if you wanna go longer, we can edit out.
Oh, good, because it's a question I like to kind of bring everything back to home. And I feel like there's always a listener out there who probably needs to hear whatever message it is that you're going to share. So, my question is, what would you tell your younger self if you could tell yourself one thing? And younger could be 5 years, 10 years, 2 minutes, whatever makes sense to you. But we all carry that wisdom and everything we've been through within our nervous system, and we can share it with someone else.
I think that I would talk to my, 17, 18, 19-year-old self who
Good.
lived through, uh, horrific abuse at the hands of not only the church, but ministry leaders, but others. And what I would say to her has to do with the ACEs study. And when I came across the ACEs research, which is adverse childhood experiences, and and there's a list of, and you can look it up, you can take the survey, and there was a list of 10 things. Did these things happen in your childhood? And you come up with a score, and my score is 5, which is significant. And then you look at what what the behavioral, physical health outcomes that are correlated. It's not a prediction, but it's more likely that people who have experienced this level would have a propensity for these things to happen in their life. And I realized that what happened to me during those years was an outgrowth of what happened to me as a child. That I walked in, I think 18 is the most vulnerable age, and we tend to be like we're adults and we send them on their way. And it is such a vulnerable age, especially because trauma developmentally puts you behind. So even though I went to college as an 18-year-old or 17-year-old, I was probably more like a 13-year-old as far as my ability to cope, my ability to I looked fine. I looked very mature, but because I didn't have a lot of the under foundation that I needed. And so I would go back and I would tell her it was not your fault, that your vulnerability
Mm.
was spotted. and that predators took advantage of it. And even though you thought you were an adult because you were 18 and you were making choices, you thought that choices you made led to these situations, but you did not realize you were being groomed. I actually found a journal that I'd written when I was a freshman in college that when I read it now, I see I was being groomed. It's very obvious that I was being
Mhm.
groomed. And so I would tell that younger self, you went to college, you thought you were starting a whole new phase in life, you were looking to get a boyfriend, you were the journal is just delightful. You were so enjoying life, but your vulnerability was spotted, and everything that happened to you
Mm.
after that was a result of that. It was not your fault.
That's so powerful. Thank you. I work with trauma a lot. I'm an EMDR therapist, and I like to describe it like a bug life. When you've gone through trauma and you're not working on healing, it's like your bug light's on. So all the pus see it and then they attract themselves to you. And it's nothing you did. And so as you heal, that bug light starts to go dimmer and dimmer, and then you attract people you can trust.
Yes. Yes, and it is not your fault. It's not like you're turning on the
Mm,
switch, "Come get me."
yeah.
There's an interesting
No.
statistic, and I don't know if I'm gonna say it correctly or not, but I want to say it's in one of my books, that college, freshmen girls are who have experienced childhood abuse, sexual abuse, are 60% more likely to be raped as college freshmen as as,
Mm,
um, those who have not, and so that's the bug light, right?
yeah.
You're vulnerable. You don't know how
Yeah.
to set boundaries. Your boundaries have been violated so much you don't know what a boundary is. You don't know. You don't recognize the danger signals because those were all normal in your life. And so you just have no defenses for it. And so yeah, and then because we were kind of adults, right? I mean, we think I know
Yeah.
I have a granddaughter and she just got her driver's license, she got her first job. She's 16. She's the most amazing human. I love her so much. But I can tell she feels like she's fully an adult, right? And so we felt like we were fully adults. We had control of the world and we knew what we were doing and it's just a really vulnerable time and add trauma, childhood trauma into it and it just backfires so many, but we think we're adults and so we shame ourselves for the rest of our lives because I hear people all the time, "Well, I made some really bad choices when I was a young adult." And I'm like, "Well, what's behind those bad choices? Like, why did you think it was a good choice? Or why did you think that was okay or was safe? What is behind that? What is behind that?" And
Right. And also, can we be kind to ourselves? You
yeah,
were still young.
you're still young. I'm working on a book for my publisher, and this one guy's telling his story in the book, and he said, "People asked me why I got involved in this," and I said, "I was 13. I was a kid." Right? And so but it is so hard. It's just like those who were sexually abused, especially in familial situations, to blame
Mhm.
themselves that it was their fault, and I worked with college girls my whole life, so they would come and they would talk, and they would be so derogatory toward their younger self. And even before I went to therapy, I was doing this. And I said, "Do you know a 12-year-old? What would you say to her?" "Oh, well, it wasn't her fault." Right? They just can't see themselves like they would see another 12-year-old. They blame themselves, but
Yeah,
they would say, "No, it wasn't." And so to get past that and to realize that your little 12-year-old self or 30-year-old self or whatever age inside of you needs you to see them like you would see another girl that age. It
absolutely.
it's a really I don't know why that's such a big hurdle, but we've just developed so much shame around what happened to us.
We do. I could go on and on about this.
We both could.
We'll
Yes.
have to do another podcast.
We will just have to do another one. I'm always ready to come back. So, yeah.
Well, I'll call you on that.
Yeah, you can call me on that.
Good. Thank you so much. I appreciate you had so much going on.
I my therapist, my first, I talk about her a lot today. I wonder if her ears are burning. Janyne, are you out there talking about me today? Yeah, I probably am. Um, but she said to me, she goes, Janyne, you could slow down. She said, but I don't think you know how to do this any other way. And so this is the life that I love. And yes, I could slow down, but I don't know how to do it any other
You
way.
don't wanna?
And I don't want to. So yeah, have me back. We'll talk
Then
again.
don't.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you again to our amazing, wonderful guest. Healing trauma isn't about fixing yourself. It's about reclaiming your agency and understanding your nervous system. Dr. Janyne McConaughey offers profound insights on how trauma, especially religious trauma, shapes our bodies and our minds and how we can gently reset and reclaim control. If you've ever felt your body on hyperdrive or completely shut down, this episode reveals some crucial counterintuitive truths to help you break free. Thank you again for joining Notes to My Nervous System. But before you go, let's take a brief pause. This was a heavy one. Let's notice your breath, your feet on the floor, the surface supporting you. Nothing to change, just noticing your nervous system register that this moment is safe enough. If this episode helped you feel even a little more steady, that matters. Small moments of regulation support resilience over time. Thank you for listening to Notes of My Nervous System. If this resonated, please subscribe or leave a review. That helps others to find this podcast. If you want more gentle micro resets, you can find the Mind Circuit app Ease in the Apple Store or Google Play. It provides short, evidence-based informed practices to support your nervous system, help you get back on task when life feels too loud. Thanks again, and as always, please be kind to your own wiring.